A new report confirms something we've been reporting on for months. Asian American and Pacific Islander women are the increasing targets of hate crimes. According to the group Stop AAPI Hate, women and girls are reporting incidents more than 2 times as often as men. On Thursday, President Biden signed a bill into law that seeks to combat the rise in attacks. Here's Vice President Kamala Harris during the ceremony earlier.
In my life, my lived experience, I have seen how hate can pervade our communities. I have served in the justice system, in the legislative branch, and in the executive branch. I have seen how hate can impede our progress. And I have seen how people uniting against hate can strengthen our country.
But some say Harris hasn't gone far enough to address issues important to the AAPI community, of which she's a part. She is the daughter of an Indian mother and Black father, making her the first biracial woman vice president. According to Politico, Harris may be becoming a victim of the barriers she broke, reporting that she faces criticism that, quote, she's focused more often on being the United States' first Black vice president than the first Asian American one. And we welcome back Politico White House correspondent and associate editor Anita Kumar, who wrote that piece. Hi again, Anita. This was so interesting. I know you talked to a number of people for your piece, including a professor who told you that the vice president, quote, doesn't fall neatly even into what we think in terms about biraciality. So, Anita, what are the implications of that? How does that manifest itself?
Sure. Thanks for having me back. What she was talking about there is that we think of biraciality in this country. We often think of it as having one white parent and one Black parent. So it's a Black-white dynamic. And of course, there are many people that fit that bill, but there are other people like Vice President Harris who don't. There is no white parent. She has, one Black parent and one Indian American or one Indian parent. So she has both of those sort of two minority parents in her background, 2 immigrants, actually. And so that's different. It's something that we don't often talk about, even though there are many other people like her. And what the professor and others were telling me is that this is sort of the future of America, that this is something that we're going to have to deal with and learn how to talk about and think about. And that's really what they were talking about. The professor compared her in a different way to Barack Obama, who, as you know, had one Black parent and one white parent, and saying that we were more accustomed to dealing with his background than we are her background.
It's interesting because these issues are not easy to talk about. Earlier this week, I spoke with Democratic strategist James Carville, and he suggested that Democrats' focus on identity is at least part of the reason why Democrats, he believes, are having a hard time connecting with some voters. He brought up this example of the term Latinx, for instance, saying that a lot of people in the country don't know what that means exactly. So this was part of a long and nuanced discussion. But Anita, here's part of that conversation. Let's listen to some of that.
I mean, people have an identity. I don't have an issue with that. But when you talk about your identity first and the country second, then people who don't share your identity are not going to be persuaded by you. So if I'm looking at myself in this TV picture, I'm white, I'm pale, I need to get some sun. All right, but that's not my chief identity. Is not the fact that I'm too white and I need to get some sun. My chief identity is the fact that I'm an American. And I want us to have a country where everybody respects other people and gets along with other people. I can't do anything about my identity any more than anybody else can. But we should talk to people in a clear language that they understand and appeal to something better than just one's identity.
So it's interesting, Anita, how has Vice President Harris navigated this intersection of race and politics before arriving at the White House?
Yeah, it's a really good point he made, an interesting point, because you have people saying, look, she should be doing certain things and saying certain things and acting in a certain way, and others who are saying exactly what he's saying, which is, why should she have to do anything different? She's encountered this her entire life. If you talk to people that have been around her as she's gotten involved in politics, obviously she was a prosecutor and the Attorney General of California, and of course, a senator before she became vice president. She's had to deal with this. But the reality is that she has grown up, as she says herself in her book, and as her childhood friends say, that her mother, though she was Indian, raised her as a Black girl and then to be a Black woman. So that was her growing up, that was her childhood, and that's what she was familiar with and how she identified herself. So in many ways, she surrounded herself by the Black community. There's also much more of a Black organization, political organization in this country, or there was at the time, than there is, sort of an Asian American community for politicians. That's just starting to take off. So she had to balance that. She balanced talking about those politics and what it means to be African American or a Black woman in this country with, issues that deal with everyone. She especially had it tough because she was a prosecutor, and there are a lot of Black people in this country who think that, these prosecutors in this country are too tough on Black Americans, or that the laws that we have in this country don't favor them, or are a hindrance. So she's really had to balance this her entire life. Of course, it's more prominent now because she is vice president.
Well, you point out the fact that Harris has said little about Indian American issues since taking office. Do you know, Anita, if that might change anytime soon?
Well, we've seen her just in the last week or two starting to do some things. Now, partly I think that's because it's actually Asian American Pacific Islander Month, Heritage Month, and I think she had some events coinciding with that. But she just recently had members of the Asian American caucus, congressional caucus, in her office last week to talk to them about some issues. She spoke at an event yesterday, the first ever Asian American Unity event. It was virtual, but she gave a speech at that event. So we are seeing her starting to do some of those things. To be honest, she hasn't really done much dealing with her background. She has her marching orders really had been in the beginning of this administration to really talk about COVID and to push, obviously, President Biden's policies on the coronavirus, on vaccines, on these spending plans. So she hasn't leaned into her background as much as we saw, say, on the campaign trail, where she did certain events that appealed to certain voting blocs.
In our final minute, Anita, I wonder, has the administration addressed any of the criticisms of the vice president that she's not doing enough to tackle these kinds of issues?
Look, they've said that the vice president identifies both as being a Black woman and a South Asian American woman. That's what's in her bio. It was in her biography when she was in the Senate, and that she's embraced both of those, that she's talked about her mother quite a lot, which she does. Her mother is a hero of hers, and she's talked about her in big speeches. So they say, look, she's talked about things, but to remind us that when you look at her biography and look at her childhood, that she was raised as a Black girl, as I mentioned before, that her mother realized that she would be perceived as a Black woman in this country because of the way America looks at race. And so that's how she was raised. And so that's sort of what she's doing and how she identifies. But so they push back a bit and say, look, she's done everything. She talks about all of those issues, and she will continue to do so.
It's a really fascinating look. I encourage people to take a look if they haven't seen the piece. Anita Kumar. Anita, always great to have you. Thank you very much.